All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started here, so we stay on track here. I'm filling in for Norton as he's out with a cold today. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We're not quite to a quorum, so we're going to hold off on our minutes approval until probably next meeting, unless we get an official quorum here. So we'll go ahead and start with introductions, and we'll go ahead and start with Stephanie.
Sure. Stephanie Jennings, City of Eugene staff.
Chris Pryor, Eugene City Council.
Kristen Karle, St. Vincent de Paul. Teresa Kennedy, City of Eugene staff. Marina Brassfield, Minister Quarters. Karen Sackstead, Northwest.
Steve Ochs, Homes for Good.
Daniel Ivey, Housing Policy Board at-large member.
John VanLandingham, Housing Policy Board member.
Okay, and Isaac Judd, Housing Policy Board member as well. And now we have Commissioner Berney. So we'll go ahead and start with public comments. I don't know who has a sign-up sheet for the public comment, but do we have any public comment here? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Diana Belowski, and I want to urge you to ask the City Council to add 4 amendments to the ADU law. The first is to waive construction fees. The second is to waive property taxes. The third is to tie those 2 waivers into a deed restriction that will require the housing to be to be affordable for 10 years at 60 AMI. So that would be about $600 a month. This will be kind of like a poor person's MUPTI, and it will allow all these ADUs to come in as actual affordable housing. The fourth thing I want you to ask the City Council is to disallow any new ADUs to be used as short-term rentals. Just think on it. We have about a 1%. We have about a 1% population of the homeless and people who don't have a place to live. About 2% of our housing has been removed for STRs in the last couple of years. So it's really important that we have regulations on STRs that are strong, that say, so this is another issue, STRs, that you disallow ADUs unless one person lives in the front house, and this is for ones that already have it. So owner-occupied ADUs, but disallow any other ADUs, disallow whole houses to be made into short-term rentals.
So
Okay, well,
Diana, before you go, I only counted 3, so I'm pretty slow.
okay, so
Well, how about if I repeat them?
Two waivers.
You said construction taxes.
Yes,
What is that? Systems development charges?
yes,
Okay.
Constru-
And
yeah,
the second
but-
one was property taxes?
yes.
I missed the third one.
The third would be to tie those in
Oh.
to also a deed restriction. So you get those 2 benefits if you have a deed restriction that runs with the land for 10 years, that says you can't rent it to anyone. Okay, got it.
But let me just note for you that the city does not have the authority to waive property taxes. Property taxes, although they support local government, are a creature of state law, and state law has to create any kind of exemption to property taxes, and there is none for ADUs. So that's not doable, although you can certainly advocate that the council do stuff, but they can't do that one.
So can I ask you then, how does the MUPTI work?
MUPTI has a state statute that authorizes
State.
local governments
I
to
see.
adopt a local option.
Okay.
So there are a number of things that are tied to affordable housing, and the city takes advantage of them, but there's none for ADUs.
Okay, so we have to change the state
And
law.
it's also not clear that you can waive SDCs.
It won't be that
But some cities
many.
are doing that.
Yeah, it
So-
won't be that many units. Okay, well, any other questions?
Just a comment.
Yes,
I
please.
believe, does not Springfield waive?
It's not clear that,
System
there are a couple of cities that are doing it. It's not clear that they, nobody has sued them, and maybe we shouldn't put this in the minutes.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Springfield does not charge SDCs for ADUs.
That is
I'm getting the lingo.
correct, Joe. The question is whether that's legal, and I don't want to say more.
Okay, thank you.
Stephanie?
All right.
So I will just also share, the city has an SDC exemption program for affordable housing. ADUs are eligible through that program, and we have processed a couple of applications. What comes with that is a commitment to a 5-year period of affordability.
What level of affordability?
So if it is a rental unit, it's at 60% of
Oh.
area median income.
So you already have it tied together.
We do, through that program, which the purpose of that program is affordable housing, and it is any form of housing. It doesn't specify, so that could be a multifamily, it could
I
be a
see.
single-family house, a duplex, a triplex, or an ADU.
Thank you so much.
Part of the confusion arises when we use the word waiver. And waiver, I think a lot of people understand that to mean the charge is
Right.
waived
Right.
and nobody pays it. The city's program has the city subsidizing it, so it's not really waived. Some other cities are waiving, like ignoring SDCs for ADUs. Not clear that that's legal.
Just
So
saying.
I don't want to say anything more.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you
very much.
very much.
So let's go ahead and have the two members come in. We'll go ahead and have you introduce yourselves.
I'm Jenna, member HPB, local architect.
Joe.
Joe Berney, Lane County Commissioner. Apparently the Springfield delegation comes in.
Still farther.
We apologize.
All right, and then let's go ahead and go through our audience and have you introduce yourselves as well.
My name is Amy Myers. I work at Sponsors Inc., but I'm actually here for a class that I'm taking at the U of O about public sector theory.
Great, thank you.
Randy Grove, citizen member of the Budget Committee.
Ken Beeson, Planning Commission. I'm the liaison from Planning Commission to this group.
Michelle Stark, St. Vincent de Paul.
Diana Belowski.
Yeah, Caraco.
Tim Morris, Lane County Budget Committee member and board president of SIGA.
I'm Laurie Galbraith. I'm a UO graduate journalism student, and I'm writing an article about renting in Eugene.
Great, thank you. All right, perfect. Are we at a quorum yet?
Yes.
Okay, great.
But
So,
were there anybody else on public comment?
oh yeah, was there anybody else on public comment to talk? Go ahead.
I just wanted to chime in on Diana's suggestion. And we had arguments over this sort of thing many times on First Decile Housing, which is a Facebook group that I'm. And defeatists say that if you have programs that produce lower cost housing, then what's likely to happen is that people who don't really need the break will end up getting those because they're clever and they're faster, fleet of foot and everything. And so the missing component there is any sort of filter that the people who actually get in there get qualified down there at the county or somewhere as far as their income, and so you need all three of those components. The thing has to be produced cheaply, and it has to have a cap on the rental price, and it has to be filtered so that the first person who gets there doesn't get a great deal and then never leave. So that's what I'm looking for. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tom. Do we have any other public comment? Okay. So we'll move on to the minutes approval. So the minutes should be in the package here, so please review those and go ahead and type up if you see some corrections that we need to make. And we'll go ahead, I saw this hand first.
Yeah, I only have some short ones, I don't have a lot. On page 4 at the top, where it says Councilor Pryor provided an update, the two quick changes. In the second line, where it says, during 2020, vote to take action on preparation, I would think probably a better word than on preparation would be against preparation. That was what it was really about, was we didn't take any action to say we don't want to prepare for the eventual, and change the word passage to implementation.
So I actually thought about that one too, Chris, and I was going to delete all after action. To take action to prepare for the bill's deadline, July 1, 2022 deadline. Well, I thought that's what council was discussing. But if you're the counselor, so.
Yeah, well, Betty had a two-part motion.
Yeah, I remember, I watched.
And the first, yeah, you watched. The first part was passed. The second part, which was to do nothing to prepare for the implementation, did not pass.
That's fine.
And so I think changing on to against and the implementation will get the sense of what it was
Yeah.
that we did.
On that same line, could I add that it ought to say during the 2020 legislative session? That's when council, I think that was the first part, was to seek repeal in the 2020
During the
session.
2020 session, yeah.
So not during the whole year. And you had a second one?
That was it.
Covered. So mine were, one on on page 2, I think Daniel only spells his last name one way, without an E. I-V.
Correct.
Okay, so down about where it says he was absent. That's misspelled. On page 4, in the fourth paragraph, the one that starts with Mr. Cabell, the third line from the bottom, Pryor explained there was still some disagreement among counselors around state law, which suggested, it didn't suggest, it actually required or provides. So state law does more than
State
suggest.
laws don't suggest.
So I think suggested ought to be provides. And then on page 6, in the fourth paragraph that starts, Mr. Cabell thought Attorney McDonald mentioned SBDP found, let's say good quality used homes. You can always find a used home, but he was finding good quality used homes.
Right? Any other corrections? Okay. Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. And do we need a consensus? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I don't think we have to do that, but we'll do it. So moving forward, we'll go through our items from the HPB members and staff. Go ahead and start with you, Jenna. You're in the hot seat. Any items?
Go ahead.
A couple of weeks ago, I received an invitation from the state to serve on a rule-making advisory committee to the DLCD on the implementation of House Bill 2001 and 2003. And I, of course, said yes. I was actually grateful to be asked to serve on the committee. And it will be made up of representation from the league, mayors and councilors from medium cities, large cities, planning directors, development directors, affordable housing providers, a whole host of folks. And essentially what it's going to do is now that House Bill 2001 and 2003 have passed, what are the rules that are going to be set up in order to implement it and administer it, which is actually a very critical function. And so this committee will be advising the LCD on what those rules should be. And in addition to the large conversations about what those are going to be breaking up into subgroups, one subgroup will be talking about the implementation of 2001 in medium-sized cities. Another one will be talking about its implementation in large cities. Another committee will be dealing with the infrastructure needs that go along with those kinds of implementations. And then the third one, which is more focused on House Bill 2003, will be talking about what do you need to do to provide that housing, to produce the housing that they're going to be talking about. House Bill 2003 talks about creating inventories to understand how much housing is available and what you need to do to provide more housing. And I've already volunteered to serve on that committee. Stephanie will also be on that committee, so we'll have some certified smart people in addition to the ones who know how to talk. But also, I will be willing to serve on other committees as needed, depending on what that particular skill set is. I've made it very clear I'm there as a policy thinker, not necessarily a person who's very wise and smart about the details of development, but I think they're looking for a balance of people in all of them. I think what's most important is a lot of times the way a bill gets implemented is successful or not successful through the rules that are made around it. So I think this advisory committee can really help to get these two bills off to a good start by providing rules that are not only workable and realistic, but it can also accommodate the uniqueness and differences within an individual community, a Eugene, a Springfield, a Corvallis, so that you don't try to just create a one-size-fits-all, but that you can try to figure out a way to make the rules consistent, but still able to be adaptable to unique situations. And I think that's a reasonable goal to try to achieve. And I'll be meeting with John, who, as you know, is familiar with a lot of the ins and outs of working in Salem, to see how I can also be as effective as possible within that environment.
And so, Chris, you got a list of the members?
Not yet, they're gonna send it out ahead of the meeting.
And just for the sake of clarity, I was asked to be an alternate for the housing administrator position. And so there is a designated position on the committee for jurisdictions that receive CDBG and home funds. I understand the primary for that position is Lynn McConnell, who's basically my counterpart in Bend. And so I'll be an alternate, and they've asked that I directly participate in one of the committees. Housing production most relates to the work that we're doing in affordable housing programs, and so that made a lot of sense to me in terms of where I should be involved.
We should note that Timothy also applied, and another Eugene tenant advocate applied, and apparently were not chosen. And I feel bad since I recruited them, and I did that because DLCD recruited me to find them. So that's always awkward. I know that Karen Knudsen also applied, and I think she's an alternate.
I'm just glad there's somebody from Lane County there.
Yeah.
I will say, when I spoke with them, they said they were still in the process of getting in touch with a lot of people, and so it may be that they're still sorting through who can
And I
participate
think that's
and
why
who can't.
I think that's why they haven't given Chris a list.
Yeah.
Or me. I've been asking for the list.
Exactly.
So it may still be to be determined.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's possible the first meeting will be in November. We haven't received a sort of solidified list of the dates. I guess one date was given to you, but I followed up and I haven't received a firm date yet.
Yeah, as far as I know, the first meeting will be on November 14th. I'm expecting it to be on November 14th, so.
Yeah.
Well, none of my children occurred when they were expected. Let me get this straight, Chris. So you're gonna learn the ins and outs of Salem so that you can inform policy that's sensitive to the ins and outs of different communities. I'm just being
In a
silly.
convoluted way, yeah, probably.
Okay.
That's how politics works, you know.
I don't know. I'm learning, and I'm attempting to do it a bit different if at all possible. And here are the wounds to show it.
What did you do?
I had 2 significant arm surgeries,
Yikes.
both on this arm that I've been deferring as long as possible. First, I would like to share with this group that as county commissioners, a few, in the same type of deal as this, a few are apparently proposed by the Association of Oregon Counties to get on different national groups, legislatives, I'll assess whether it's real or not. But I will be representing Oregon on the Economic Development Workforce legislative body of the National Association of Counties, and how that's where housing fits in. And the survey they had just completed identifies them assessing what they want their priorities to be. And I think they're more traditional, like more money for community development block grants and more money for Section 8 vouchers and reevaluating the amount of Section 8 voucher based upon housing prices in certain areas, things you would expect. So I'll be reporting to you if there's anything to report on that. I also am really sorry but appreciative. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting. I'm appreciative for all this information on manufactured homes. And I don't know if this is the time, but I actually had a couple of questions on this handout. So I looked at the agenda. Is this the right time for that or not? You tell me.
I think it's as good as any, so, yeah.
Okay. Did I read, I want to let you know that there are a group of us that are very aggressively now seeking property for actually looking at a private new entity to see if it's possible to develop a manufactured home park in Springfield that would end up being tenant-owned. And it would be specifically so that, looking at the patrician and the decision that our city council made about displacement, which now is going to occur. And I just wanted to share that I don't know, I didn't see the tenant ownership in here, and maybe that was my own not seeing everything, but we're looking at the concept of not only how we're financing it and using the revenue stream from existing patrician rents to help underwrite qualifying for bonding, but we're also looking at how we transition over 4 or 5 years so that really tenants own the ground they're on, and they own, and if not the ground they're on, individually in common, and how they can own that, and how we can bring the cost per unit significantly down from what we see both in the private and the nonprofit sector. And maybe we can't, and how we can establish community solar there, so that in fact charging stations and any common facilities like streetlights are charged with a combination of solar and battery. So it's kind of fun to use the commissioner leverage to try and join a private nonprofit sort of formation in response to a city policy that we were not supportive of. And I'm hoping that as this body sort of irons out what its initiative will be as it relates to manufactured home parks, that we can both inform and be informed by it. And the only other question I had really was a question when you mentioned all the ADU eligible kinds of structures and how that ties into the city's low income. What about, there's a name for it, and I don't know the official name, but what about boarding houses and the old fashioned, you know, where single adults rented a room in a house, and at the end of the hall was a bathroom, and you know, and blah blah blah. I mean, is that something that is also eligible for the kinds of support that the city provides to increase its amount of affordable shelter?
Yes, I mean, and we have supported group homes, single room occupancy.
That's it, thank you.
And so
SRUs,
most
right?
of the proposals that we receive are for specific targeted populations. So for example, Sponsors has used this model.
Hey, thank you, I should have
And
known.
but it doesn't have to be for a specific population.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you, John. Go ahead.
I don't have anything new. I don't have anything new.
I've got a few things. I'll go quickly, so run through them. So the biggest thing was that we broke ground on MLK Commons right across from Norton Stadium a couple weeks ago, so right before the Washington State game. So.
Which is why we won.
And then thanks to the city of Springfield, we were able to acquire the property for Hayden Bridge Meadows right next to Fred Meyer on 5th. So the city of Springfield, it worked out great. They had CDBG funds that needed expended. We needed money. And so they actually gave us a short-term loan for the acquisition on that, which worked out great for both. And it's going to end up being 70 units of family housing right next to Fred Meyer there. So we're excited about that. And then we also got good news that Homes for Good in Lane County got selected to the state I'm going to get this right, the Permanent Supportive Housing Consortium. So what that is it's the state's put out a lot of money for permanent supportive housing, and they're providing training to 10 groups in Oregon, and we were selected as one of those groups. And it's going to be Homes for Good staff, Lane County staff, shelter care staff, and then Quantum Property staff who's our third-party property manager. So there's going to be 6 required trainings for 6 months, and then after that, they're going to fund projects that come out of this group. So we're hopeful to, we're excited to get the expertise and hopefully some money with it. So.
Thank you.
Can I just would add, so what Oregon is doing is actually modeled after a program in Indiana where the state of Indiana had basically done a permanent supportive housing institute to try to help local teams to develop capacity and also to help the state to understand how they need to support it. And so we're definitely going to kind of follow along and learn, you know, just secondhand about what they're learning so that we can understand how our local resources can also be aligned to support these projects.
Great. And Jenna, you had a comment?
I was just wondering, I mean, I feel like the MLK Commons project is unique and interesting, and like, I don't know if everyone in the audience knows what that is.
Right, yeah, gladly expound on that. So the Commons on MLK is right across from Autzen Stadium, and it's going to be 51 very small units, around 400, 450 square feet. And it's going to be for folks that are coming, that have been identified through the Frequent User Diffuse Program.
Systems
frequent user system engagement.
Yes, and so it's for.
It's totally intuitive.
Read the glossary.
And so it'll be for folks that are homeless, and it'll provide, the whole ground floor will be supportive services for them. And so I think it's, I may be biased, but I think it'll actually be one of the bigger, I guess, projects that'll ever impact the homeless situation we have in Eugene, Springfield area. So I'm
It's
very,
kind of like
very
Housing
hopeful
First
for
with
it.
supportive services.
It is, yes. So we're very excited. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think it's going to pay off in big time. So.
And maybe just add the people who are supporting it, because the healthcare provider.
Oh yeah, so there was there was a list of 12 funding sources to get the project together, including 4 healthcare providers, with providing both capital money and money for services. And then Lane County committed to funding the service gap. So the reason we've never done one of these projects, it's just so expensive to have the services on site, and you can't recoup that through the rents. And so the county was able to commit to filling that funding gap, which is huge.
Big deal.
It is. And then the city of Eugene provided home funds, the county provided additional money. It's really been a big team project, so.
So the city provided home funds, a little bit of general fund dollars, older general fund dollars that we had a small pot of, plus system development charge waivers. And I think the total, Ellen, of those 3 things was around, 1.2, something like that?
Yeah, nearly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds right.
And the cost for the whole kit and caboodle?
The whole kit and caboodle is $13 million. So.
If I may, a
Please,
point I'd
yes.
like to make as well, oftentimes this group is kind of Eugene-centric. What I think is most important is that whether city, municipality, or private lenders, or healthcare organizations where this is their first foray into this, or the county amidst scarcer and scarcer resources for more and more needs, everybody creatively pulled in, and I think this is a real win for the whole community. I don't know if it's going to get much press, but it really should, because it's a big deal, and everybody's doing their absolute best.
Absolutely.
Nothing for me.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay. Great. And I think it just.
Staff items.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do staff items.
So,
Yep.
Teresa, do you have anything you want to talk about?
Well, just a fair housing training on Tuesday at University of Oregon in the evening from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. We have flyers up here. When the packet went out, which included a list of the 5 fair housing trainings this year, it actually said November 14th for the upcoming training. So if you're planning to attend, please note it's Tuesday, not Thursday.
And Ellen, could you just mention the RFP deadline?
Yes. I mentioned previously that the home request for proposals is out right now. It is about $900,000+ available for Springfield. And it was going to be due on October 30th, but we extended the deadline until November 13th. So that's Wednesday, November 13th at noon. And we're looking forward to some good proposals in Springfield.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie, do you have any other stuff? Okay, so I think at this point, I want to pass around a letter from Chris Wigg, and I'll just kind of mention a couple highlights here. Chris has been on Housing Policy Board for the last couple of years, and so he wanted to bring up a couple things to us having to do with the canvas. They've been doing canvassing for in the West University neighborhood, and there's some DPLC interns and volunteers knocking on doors in the neighborhood and handing out flyers about the Eugene Rental Housing Code. So there was a great reaction from that and a lot of gratitude for receiving that information. And so he's encouraging us to spread the word about that rental housing code program. And on another note, Chris has decided not to apply again to serve another term on the Housing Policy Board when his term is up. And so he's asking all of us on the Housing Policy Board to please, and you can read in the letter here, but let's see, he's encouraged us to look for more perspectives that are missing from our board as we're consisting mostly of white middle-class homeowners. And so he's encouraging us to look for people who have different backgrounds, and so that their conversations and their housing needs are more
Represented.
engaged here. What's that?
Represented.
Here on our board. So I think that that's something that we can think about as we move forward, and I think that's a great perspective. So you have the whole letter here, and you can feel free to read through that. Stephanie?
So we will just talk for a moment about the recruitment process for new HPB members. Do you want to talk about it a little bit, Teresa?
Sure. So we will, in December, we'll send out, maybe even the mid-November, haven't nailed down the recruitment dates yet, but we will send out an announcement to the interested parties list, and we will post the opening on the city's page as well as on Lane County's. And folks will apply, and then ultimately the electeds will decide who will be appointed.
And the last time around, we received quite a few applications. Do you remember how many? Was it over 15?
Yeah, over 15.
15 applications. So we do, as staff, we review all the applications, and then as the HPB bylaws state, the 2 elected officials select the at-large members. So we'll work with the elected officials to do that.
Can I put you on the spot and ask a quick question? Are there any structural, to speak to Chris's point of not having a very diverse housing policy board, are there some criteria that we can go off of, or that we have gone off of, in order to encourage some diversity on the committee or the board?
So I think one of the most important first steps is getting applications from diverse members of the community. And one thing that I will say is that we're engaging a lot of new people through the Renter Protections Advisory Committee, and that group is more diverse. And so that's certainly a group that is starting that might be interested in applying. We also received quite a few applications for the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee, and so there may be some of the applicants from that process that would be interested in this. So I think what we will do is not just send it to the HPB interested parties list, but we'll send it to the Human Services Commission interested parties list, or to if others in this group can help to send it to others that can generate those applications, because I think that's really where we need the sort of most help is in generating folks that are willing and able to meet on a monthly basis.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So a white middle-class male homeowner is recommending that we get more diversity.
He's throwing himself on the sword. I think that's why he's not replying.
I enjoy life's contradictions. I was going to ask, and it sounds like it's okay for members of this board to also send the notice of opportunity out to.
Sure.
Well, it's encouraged.
It's encouraged, so that's great. Thank you.
And then the 2 of you get to make the decision.
Yeah, I learned it as I heard it. Great, thank you. And if we get someone that this body agrees that is working, et cetera, are we willing to accommodate by changing the times of the meeting?
So, I mean, typically,
Because some
what
people that
we-
are out in the trenches can't come and join us in this meeting.
Absolutely. So typically, the way that we've tried to approach meeting scheduling is that we try to identify when everyone can meet, when the
Okay,
most
just go
number of
from there.
people
Okay.
can meet. And so we
Sounds like
typically
yes.
try to just say the greatest number can meet on this date.
Makes sense.
And
We
sometimes
can look at
folks
it.
have
We can look at it.
limitations about that. I mean, we can certainly talk, we could certainly do a poll of members to see when folks are available, and then we could ask applicants,
That's great.
when they could meet, and then figure out if there's a match there.
Thanks.
But that is kind of fundamental scheduling challenge we often run into.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Did anybody not get included in the updates? Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, we'll move on to our Renter Protection Committee update.
So Norton was going to give this update, but he's unable to be here today. So I will speak to this a little bit and then also ask if John, if he wants to chime in, because he was at the last two meetings. So the Renter Protections Committee has been meeting. They had their second meeting, and this meeting really focused on landlord and tenant education. And the model that we've been using in these meetings is trying to kind of talk about a specific renter protection issue. We invited several speakers to come and talk about existing renter education programs and from different perspectives, community perspectives. And so we had representatives at this meeting from Homes for Good, Beth Ochs, who runs the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association, the St. Vincent de Paul Second Chance Renter Rehab Program, Catholic Community Services, Centro Latino Americano Oregon Law Center, and the Renter Owners Association of Lane County. And so we asked the speakers to tell us briefly about what they do, what they identify as key challenges and key opportunities. And so, and then we had a discussion amongst the committee members of their observations from their own perspectives, as well as reactions to the group. And then tried to prioritize the ideas that were coming out of that. Because of course even when you just sort of take this one little piece of renter protections, there's a lot that's happening in the community, and there's a lot of ideas about what we could be doing. So what we are doing is based on that, we've drafted kind of a short memo that we're going to review with the committee at the next meeting, because we want to sort of get clear on their recommendations and kind of their priority for recommendations. So we'll talk more about that at the next HPB meeting. But just to kind of give you a little bit of a highlight of what were some of the issues that were discussed and the ideas that came out of it. One thing that was very interesting was the discussion about landlords wanting more resources around tenants with mental health issues. And so really this is, we talk a lot about mental health when we think about homelessness. This is really identifying it as a much broader, I would say, community public health issue. And so I think that was a very interesting outcome from this meeting, and some interesting overlaps with community public health work that is happening and community health work that's happening right now. I think that the people in the room actually learned about each other's programs, and so that was definitely something that was an interesting piece of this is people knowing the ways in which others are trying to reach renters and landlords. In terms of the ideas that came out of it, the expand or establish a hotline for both tenants and landlords was something that came out of it. There is some interest in creating a more centralized location where tenants can go, and that they're not trying to kind of figure out where to go based on whether they have a fair housing issue or a rental housing code issue or a tenant landlord issue. There was a lot of interest in providing resources when people are becoming renters, and then when they are in crisis, and recognizing that those are two different points of access and providing information, and people need different things at different points in time. Then provide tenant and landlord translation access was another interesting idea that came out of this. And then find ways to expand landlords' knowledge of rights and responsibilities. I'll stop there and Teresa, John, I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add from the discussion.
So I would note that the local landlord group, Rental Owners Association, ROA, has a hotline for its members, but it's limited to its members. So if you're a landlord, you're not a member, you don't get to use their hotline. CETA, the Springfield Eugene Tenants Association, which is relatively new, has a hotline. Tim and Josh is the star of the hotline. And so that they're getting a lot more calls than they anticipated. There was some talk about whether there was an ability to do a combined hotline. Not sure that that's feasible, but that was an idea that was put out there. There was also talk about the need for local rent assistance, something in addition to Section 8. And there's actually talk now at the state level about whether there should be a state Section 8 program. Because rents have gone up so much that a number of the programs, including the Second Chance Rent and Rehab program, people can't find a place they can afford. But I think when we talk about other little issues like screening people who lack Social Security numbers, but they weren't as big as the ones that you already had.
And so the next meeting will be on November 13th. And the focus of that next meeting is going to be renter assistance, financial assistance, and security deposits or rent assistance. And so, and I think part of this, which is coming out, is also what is the right role for the city in this? You know, for example, with a voucher program, you know, there are these active discussions happening about creating a statewide voucher program, and there's pros and cons to doing that at a city level, and so that is something that I think the committee will be taking into consideration. Some of the work, you know, there's clearly needs outside of Eugene, so some of this is also just some questions about how do you create resources outside of the city as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I think I have just a real quick update that I forgot to share. It's like probably the biggest one is that speaking of Section 8, the wait list is opening Tuesday the 12th.
Okay.
And it's open through November 19th. And what I could do is send out this flyer maybe to this group so it can be sent out, because there's a lot of places people can go in order to access it. So
yeah, we can send it out to the HPB email list.
Okay.
There was also a pretty good article, rarely,
today's paper.
pretty
Yes.
rare, pretty good article in the Register Guardian. I mean, explaining, taking the time to explain a complicated issue.
I'll compliment your boss on your memory.
All right, great, thank you. All right. So unless there's anything else on that, we will move on to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee update.
So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee had its first meeting on October 16th. We have 9 community members, community residents of Eugene on the committee. And it has 3 private sector members, 3 housing advocates, and 3 at-large members. There's information on our website if you'd like to look up more about the members, the meeting schedule. The next meeting will be on November 20th. With any new committee, the first meeting it's a little bit of people getting to know one another, sharing their perspectives, where they're coming from. We asked everyone to talk a little bit about what motivated them to become part of this work, and also what are their best outcomes and worst fears for the committee's work. This next meeting is going to focus on understanding needs in the community and trying to kind of help them to understand some of our existing programs and how because understanding how we use our existing resources is important when you're thinking about how to use additional resources and what are the gaps and challenges we face. I will say that the following 2 meetings, one is going to focus on homeownership, both homeownership assistance and homeownership development, And then the other one will focus on rental assistance and rental development. We have been trying to sequence these in such a way that the recommendations from the Renter Protections Committee can be available to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee as we're starting to think about these issues. The goal is to get back to council in late February with a set of recommendations for allocating the first year's resources of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And we're still in the process of estimating how much money is going to come in because this is a new source of revenue. We don't have any history of how much money we're actually going to receive. The other piece of this is that the ordinance stated that council intends to dedicate $500,000 of general fund through supplemental budget number 1 that they take action on in December. Any questions?
Go ahead, John.
What does renter development mean?
Rental development. So
you
development
said
of
renter.
affordable rental developments.
Creating more of them. Gotcha. You mean like structuring finance a different way, bringing more developers into town, opening up the urban growth plan, things of that nature?
No, I mean, for example, the projects that Steve mentioned, those are all rental developments.
Okay, that's that category.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So it's really how do we, what are the challenges with funding that type of development, and what are possible uses of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars to
That makes
support
sense.
those projects?
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm sure you're on this, but Oregon Housing recently released their final QAP, which will guide the section, or the section 42, 9% and 4% tax credit projects. And they're also updating pretty much all of their funding programs. So I'm hoping that committee will understand what types of projects that those funds are kind of asking for, and how the local funds can help that or fund something that might be different.
Yeah. One topic we did discuss at the first meeting, when we talked about our best outcomes, my best outcome was leveraging, and how could we leverage our dollars to really make a case for those state dollars. And so that is something that we're going to be talking about in all of these meetings is really, where does this resource fit in? Because the vast majority of resources are coming through the state. And, but in many cases, especially with all development, if you don't have a site, you can't go after those resources. And so I think we will be talking about the different steps in the process and where local resources might make the biggest difference in being able to help projects move forward. And I think this is the place where developers really are going to be invited to share their perspectives as well. So just like with the Renter Protections Committee, we want to have different voices come in, give their perspectives, because this is a community conversation. It's not just a conversation for the people on the committee.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
I'm sorry, I'll be quiet.
You're fine.
To me, this is it's really significant. Thank you for mentioning that, because it seems like the people that know about where these programs or resources are internal policy people whose job this is to know this stuff. So let me make a suggestion, and that is maximum leverage of everything also includes, whether we like them or not, things like opportunity zones and attracting external resources to our community. While obviously my main focus is going to be Springfield and Lake County, I would like to share that from my past business, there are two large groups, and these are not developers. These are literally funds that finance developers as it relates to housing or multi-use, that have done the analytics on our county, are very interested in investing here, would need an alignment of all these different things and how they relate to each other. And you ought to include people like that in the conversation. People that we might not like their motives, which is to make money, but people that have large amount of funds, that are attracted to this area, that are attracted to the benefits for their clients of opportunity zones specifically, where you all, or some of you all, would be the content experts that would know, well, what could and could not be leveraged to bring their dollars in. So I just wanted to suggest, that's a group I'd love to give you a couple of names and contacts as appropriate, and please don't forget them, because dollars do kind of make the world go round.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on Joe's observation. One of the things we've talked about, or at least I've talked about a lot, as we talk about affordable housing development, is that our current providers are doing a great job, but they can't carry that weight all by themselves. They're limited in many ways in terms of funding and capital and the hoops they have to jump through to do things. And so it's always been a part of the conversation to figure out how to bring more of the private sector into the conversation as part of the full equation. And I think part of the reason why the state passed a change to the charter that said you can now bond for private development was along those exact same lines. And while our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, a centerpiece of which is the construction excise tax, is Eugene-centric. It's a Eugene fund that's passed to support housing in Eugene. But to this point, if Springfield wanted to create a CET, or Lane County wanted to create a CET, that gives you a broad brush with which to paint and to do things with. So I think that's a great conversation to continue on. Yes, we need more private partners. Yes, we need expanded capital, not just from Eugene, but from many other locations in Lane County. And we need to think about it in terms of leveraging, which is what this whole committee is all about, is how we can figure out how to maximize those dollars so that we can use them in the most effective way with other dollars to make stuff happen. So yeah, I think that's a great starting point for where we would want to take the conversation. Eugene, I think, is making some really good steps now, but that can all be expanded to be much more effective.
Great, thank you. Okay, go ahead, John.
Isaac, you're a member of this committee.
I am.
Do you have any observations?
I do.
Good.
So it was, like Stephanie said, it wasn't huge on specifics. It was more getting broad picture of what the committee's concerns and hopes are. And I think that the one thing that really stood out to me, and I also felt this, is the concern for a lot of the members of that committee were that we would just get lost in a sea of bureaucracy, and that we wouldn't be able to have measurable things that we could point to that were accomplished because of the CET being passed. And so I think that there's a lot of people who are pretty motivated to see council took a big risk on pushing forward for the CET, and I think that we need to, I think the observation was that we needed to make sure that honor, that to really make it worthwhile and to not get lost in the weeds here. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that actually shows itself as we start reviewing projects. But I think it's a huge opportunity, and hopefully we rise to the occasion to make it really effective. So. Anything else on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee? Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to the Consolidated Plan and Process Update.
So I'll take the lead on this again. So every 5 years, Eugene and Springfield do conduct a process to assess our needs for housing, homelessness, and economic development, and it's used to develop strategies for the use of CDBG and home funds over a 5-year period. And so this process really starts with looking at data. We are working with an external consultant this time around, the Cloudburst Group, which has worked with many communities across the country to develop their consolidated plans and fair housing plans. And so, they got under contract in early October, and so I've been working with them over the past month, getting them acquainted with our community, and they're doing data analysis. The next phase of the process is community consultations, and we are going to do a survey again. We did a survey in 2015. We actually did surveys for 3 separate groups. We did a survey for community residents, service providers, and then the third group, which we kind of called indirect service providers. So we were targeting people who work in libraries or police or fire, so people who interact with people who have needs that maybe aren't human service providers. And so that is likely to be the 3 groups we're going to target again. The other piece of this is that we will be trying to schedule consultations with different groups. So we do have time on the Poverty and Homelessness Board agenda, and I expect we will have one of the consultants here for that conversation. And then we are arranging other times as possible. Sometimes the consultants will be here, sometimes not. I will be going to council on November 13th to give an overview to council on this process. Aaron Fifield has communicated with Springfield City Council via memo and is working with Mayor Lundberg and other councilors there.
Great.
And also, I'll just continue to update at each HPB meeting on the progress and what we're finding. Thanks.
Did you say when that's supposed to be wrapped up? Is that?
Good question. So the entire process has to be wrapped up by May 15th. That's when both our consolidated plan and action plan are due. You need to be far enough along in your process with your draft strategies and goals to be able to do your annual allocation process, which we typically start in February. So because council will approve both the allocation of the first year's funds and the 5-year action plan. And both Eugene has to adopt it, and then Springfield also has to adopt it.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right. So moving on to our next agenda item is the EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant. This is good. Okay, good.
Amanda D'Souza is the staff person in community development that manages this program, and she's going to give you guys a little bit of an overview.
Hi, my name is Amanda D'Souza. I am a business development analyst here at the city in our community development division. So I'm here just to give you an update on our Brownfields grant. It's a grant we have through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, so it's a federal grant. And what it does is it gives us money to do brownfields assessments for properties around the area. We have this grant in partnership with the city of Springfield and Lane County. This is the second grant we've had. We got the first one in 2012, which was a result of the Lane Livability Consortium. As we finished that grant, we applied a few more times to medium success, and then finally in 2017 we were able to get a new round of funding. So with this current grant, we've been implementing it for about 2 years, and right now we are we've done a total of 20 phase 1 environmental assessments. 12 phase 2 assessments are completed, and so phase 1 assessments are what we call kind of desk environmental assessments. You do kind of computer research, historical uses on a site, and then phase 2 assessments are where you really get into the ground and look for contamination. So to give you an idea of how this, on the back of the handout, there's a map of kind of the sites we've been working on with this grant. With this grant, we've done 8 sites in Springfield, 10 in Eugene, and 3 in Lane County. A lot of the assessments we've done are for properties that are in areas that are kind of already seeing a lot of momentum for redevelopment. In Springfield, we did 3 in the downtown area that are on vacant lots and have had auto-centric uses. So an old dealership, an old auto mechanic shop. We also have a few going on in Glenwood, which aligns with the city's plans to revitalize that area. In Eugene, we've had a couple in the downtown area, including the Bus Barn, the Butterfly Lot, which is going to be the future farmers market, and 1059 Willamette. One of the more interesting ones we've had this year, and it's kind of a good example of what we generally find in a typical property here, because it's Eugene. It's not as contaminated as a lot of other areas in the country that have seen a lot more manufacturing uses, but one site we had was in the Whitaker, which is in one of our focus areas. It's a vacant site. There was a dilapidated house, and there was a developer interested in looking at it, and they're very worried about what they were going to find because it's been sitting there vacant for who knows how long. And we did a phase 1 assessment and found that there was no concerns on the site, and so the developer was able to close on that sale. And it's at about 2nd and Washington is the area, and they have plans to do office, residential, and warehouse space. So I think that's a pretty good example of the kind of projects that we like to see and are pretty typical for our area. And then in Lane County, we've done 2 in Cottage Grove in the downtown area, and then 1 in Dexter. It was a site that was acquired through a tax foreclosure. It was a dumping ground for a long time. And after assessment, the county was able to do some cleanup on the site, and there was a local mill that was previously in Springfield that now leases the site and is moving their operations and plans to hire 10 new people as their production expands. So we really like to see the job creation that comes out of this program. We are holding a community meeting next week, on next Tuesday from 12 to 1 in the library, just to share some of our successes and share with people kind of some of the results that have come out of this federal funding. It's been really useful to kind of help a lot of development move forward, get over those small barriers, and be able to kind of see some better reuse of underutilized land. Yes?
So does the program actually provide any funding for the cleanup, or is it just the assessment?
We only do funding for assessment. The state has a program that they have either low interest loans, and then for public entities it could be forgiven loans. But the state has resources for cleanup. Unfortunately, we don't have that right now. But yeah, the fact that we had 20 phase 1s and only 12 phase 2s, those were 8 sites that we didn't find anything, and so there was no real concerns of contamination.
I would just add, so when folks are applying for affordable housing resources, they have to come with some form of site control, option to purchase, and so this resource is really helpful with that kind of early due diligence. That sometimes really can be a barrier to a project moving forward. And this is something that's required not just for federal funding, but any kind of bank funding. They always need to see a phase 1 as part of the due diligence for the property.
Yeah, and we've helped out Homes for Good. We're working with Dev Northwest right now. St. Benny's knows about the program, so we try to reach out to all the housing providers as much as possible because they're exactly the kind of projects that we want to be helping out.
That's one question.
Yeah.
From the start, when somebody applies, how long does it take to get the report back?
That's one of the more troublesome parts of the program because we're working with the EPA and they're very strapped. It is a longer process. It's pretty easy for property owners, but if you're in a hurry, it's not the program for you. So if you're doing a phase 1, it could take probably 6 to 8 months from application to the actual result, but the actual phase 1 work is only about 3 to 4 weeks. So.
So if we're wanting to get an option on a property, we need to get an option for 9 months.
Yeah, probably. If you're really worried it's contaminated, you probably should get the 9 months, yeah.
At least.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
All right. We're moving on to the auxiliary dwelling unit update.
So, Alyssa Hampson is here to talk about the accessory dwelling units update.
Great, thank you.
So, Alyssa Hansen with the Eugene Planning Division, and I was just checking my calendar, and I was here in August, so I was trying to figure out how far back I needed to go to remind you guys where we are and where we've been. And even though I was here in August, I think I better give you a quick what happened last episode. So, in July, previously I'm lost. In July of 2018, the Eugene City Council adopted amendments to our land use code with the intent to comply with Senate Bill 1051. That was remanded, or that was appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals by multiple parties, and we ended up with a remand, meaning they handed it back to us to fix it. And the council started addressing that earlier this year, including a public hearing in May. And then we had some more changes to state law in between that, including House Bill 2001, which actually, in addition to the middle housing components, includes some pieces related to ADUs, which I'll get to in just a minute. And then we had another related decision from the Land Use Board of Appeals that also kind of clarified a few things. Since August, there was a work session at the council in September where the intent was to start discussing the ordinance before them and to take action. So the ordinance that was part of the May public hearing, plus a couple changes based on the state law. I would say that work session ended up talking about ADUs, but a lot of things about ADUs, including incentives and how can we come up with an incentive. So that as an offshoot of that, there are other staff working on both a memo and eventually a work session on other things that we can do to incentivize ADUs. So whether it's financial, mostly financially, I believe, whether there's other things for system development charges or permit fees or some kind of property tax exemption. So those things are being looked at. And then we went back to council in October to again start to look at the ordinance that they had discussed, or that was part of the May public hearing. And several councilors put some motions on the table to remove some additional barriers to ADUs, and two motions that Councilor Ye put out passed, including making it easier to build ADUs on sloped lots. And I can't really do this justice without a picture or a visual for you, but the way our standards work, they work fine if you're on a flat lot, but the minute you put them on a sloped lot, you're basically looking at like a hobbit house. You have to like really carve into the side of the hill to build this house. So making it, and we've had many people just walk away from the counter because it doesn't really make sense on those lots that have a slope. And so that was one of them, and then the other one was to allow ADUs above garages, and there's a couple barriers to that. The biggest one is the height, but there's some other little tweaks that need to happen to allow for an ADU above a garage, whether it's an existing garage or a new garage. And there were two additional motions that didn't get made at that particular meeting that will probably get made at the next meeting, and that's removing lot size minimums and then removing the occupancy and bedroom limitations. Actually adding those back, because right now the ordinance would remove those from the all the neighborhoods, and Councilor Zelenko wants to add those back for the 3 university neighborhoods. So we are working on scheduling another meeting for them to consider the revised ordinance, and the intent is to have that by the end of before the end of the year. That's getting a little tricky, given that there's a lot of other topics that want to get on the schedule by the end of the year. The two things I want to leave you with are, one, that our owner occupancy requirements we cannot enforce them. So not only did the changes in House Bill 2001 say, hey, as of January 1st, you can't require owner occupancy, but we actually had a decision from the Land Use Board of Appeals that said we can't apply it now. So it's still in our code in text, but we are not able to apply it or enforce it. So know that. And then even if council, for whatever reason, doesn't make it through or adopt an ordinance by the end of the year, the parking requirements, on-site parking requirements, will not apply starting January 1st. So, for ADUs only.
John? Yeah.
Yes.
So, Alyssa, help me understand. You said that staff is working on some economic incentives to bring back to council for the next discussion.
Yes.
And those
yes.
Those include SDC waivers and property tax exemptions?
Yeah, it was kind of broad. It said bring us back some possible financial incentives. Honestly, the conversation got started by Councilor Clark, who wanted to do something like a MUPD, but for
The people's MUPD.
like a property tax exemption for an ADU, and then it kind of brought into what other financial incentives might there be.
So you missed my earlier lecture.
Okay.
Sorry.
Apologies for that.
Sorry to repeat it. I won't do the SDC part. But the property tax exemption is doable, but you would need a state statute, and I'm sure your lawyers are figuring that out. It's not that, it wouldn't be that hard, it would have to be a local option. And so that the city could choose to adopt or not. But people like Representative Fahey would probably be very interested in that idea because she wants to encourage ADUs. Very clearly, she's been critical of the council for taking so long to get here. The one thing you should do in advance would be to talk to the school district because property taxes are a big part of the school district's budget. They've supported other property tax exemption, local options that we've adopted, the city's adopted for affordable housing under the theory that it gets them more kids. And their goal in life is to educate kids. And as our city ages and becomes more expensive, families with kids live elsewhere. So ADUs might generate more kids. They might see that as a win-win.
Okay, go ahead, Joe.
That's an interesting formula. ADUs generate kids. I've heard several people mention the possibility of property tax exemption, but I'm very unclear what that actually means. Does that mean, let me throw a couple of my speculations, and maybe those of you that have used the term could elucidate. Does that mean no increase on property tax even though there's an increase in square footage? Does that mean the entire property gets benefit of some partial property tax relief? What are you talking about?
It's entirely
what
a
does
creature.
the term mean?
It's entirely a creature of the state statute. So MUPD is a 10-year exemption on the improvement. So the land continues to pay property taxes, and after
Is it
10 years.
or up to 10 years?
Well, I think it's up to 10 years, so the city can
It's up
choose.
to 10 years. So
But
there's
the
actually
exemption, the
discretion.
affordable housing
Right.
exemptions are on the whole thing, and it's,
I
so far we've
appreciate-
been able to,
John,
it's
I
20
appre-
years that's renewable.
I appreciate that, but right now we're on conceptual thing because there is no state legislation. I'm just wondering
Right.
what the concept is.
And with Councilor Pryor, do you remember if it got that specific at the council meeting on whether or not Councilor Clark was interested?
What that meant,
In my mind, I thought it was just that incremental, like what did the ADU brought to the property tax, but I could be. I could be wrong.
I think it was relatively vague. I think it was one of these, the idea popped into your head and then you just throw it out on the table, kind of a deal. And I think some of the things we do are on the main track, and then sometimes some of the things we do go off onto a side track. And I think going onto a side track is a strategy to keep you from being on the main track. And this may fall into that category. That's my editorial opinion.
And so we're not bringing it back with the land use regulations. It's going to follow its own track.
Any other questions for Alyssa?
Yeah.
I would just like to editorialize and save Chris from having to do this. Just getting the damn thing passed. At this point, I mean, we had advocacy earlier to ask for more. No, because, I mean, they haven't even gotten to 2001, good Lord. And just for this small little piece of the state law change, there aren't that many parameters.
Right.
Do it, and that's what Chris has been saying. When he was talking about the tracks, that's what he meant.
Right, that makes sense.
Delay is a strategy, and I think
Yes.
some folks have found that their only viable strategy at this point, because of state law, is to just delay.
Right.
Fortunately, state law has deadlines built into it. They're not going to happen anytime super soon, but they are deadlines nonetheless. And so if you're willing to wait, time is on your side, but that's extremely frustrating when there's a lot of stuff you could do, should do, particularly if you want to be deliberate about the code you put in place, because if you just delay, then you're not putting good code in place. And that's very frustrating.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. All right. So our last item here, and we're right on track here, is our short-term rental update.
So Lydia Kay is going to speak to this.
Good afternoon. So yeah, Lydia Kay with the Building and Permit Services Division, and I am working currently, the City Council probably in this summer directed staff to take a look at short-term rentals, regulating them. We don't currently have any regulations. They are permitted as an accessory sort of an accessory use in the single-family zone. So we don't have any parameters, any way, we don't have a licensing requirement. And as I'm sure you know, and these are things like Airbnb, VRBO. A lot of interest in them, whether they have an impact on housing stock, whether the nuisance issues that sometimes can arise with those. So we took a look, we went in September, taking some information to the council about some of the different areas that we can regulate. And they directed staff to draft a draft ordinance to bring back. We're going to go also by the end of the year. That's a popular time. So we'll be before them December 11th with a draft code. Some of the things the council was interested in. So there hasn't been any discussion, and I've spoken with some of the neighborhood groups in the chamber, and largely the community is supportive of some type of a regulation. There hasn't been anyone who's come out and said prohibit them. Obviously, they have some benefits in terms of providing some ability for people to raise extra income. We have some issues in we have tools in the nuisance ordinance that allows us to address things like occupancy, garbage, noise, those types of things. So one of the requirements they're interested in is having an owner occupancy requirement. So this would prohibit people from out of state being able to buy up housing and just use them for Airbnb. The way that the regulations are drafted, and they're just a draft at the moment, is that there would be a requirement that an owner live in the home something like 270 days a year. You could rent the home while you're there, and you would be limited to renting it for 90 days if you're not actually occupying the dwelling. So that's one of the things that we're proposing to the city council. They wanted to have some parking requirements, and so again, we've looked at some different ways different cities have done this. Don't want to create big parking lots in residential zones, but we do want to make sure that that the neighborhood is not negatively impacted. Another thing that the council was interested in, and a few, Santa Monica kind of led the way with this, and Portland recently won a legal case requiring that the platforms themselves have a role in enforcement, that they don't put anything on their platform unless they have a business license, that they've followed all of the rules, they're collecting the transient room tax. And we're also asking the platforms to keep a registry. At the moment, we don't have any way of knowing where these are. The platforms take the transient room tax and they just give a lump sum to the city saying this is how much it is, but they've been have raised privacy issues with releasing the addresses. And again, this is something that Santa Monica addressed in a legal case, so we're going to put that out there. My expectation is that the city council will probably hone their direction to us in December. We will need to have obviously a public process, so there will be a public hearing in order to adopt the ordinance. We in planning and development will do some outreach to make sure that we're reaching out to as many people in the community so that they know that that's coming. Get some feedback, and then I expect we'll have a public hearing and adoption. I think the council would like to do something sometime this winter, early spring. So that's what I can tell you. Yep.
Go ahead, Dan. Sorry, I have a quick question. This is kind of picking nits. I know we're getting to the end here, but can you walk me through the parking requirement argument? Because from my perspective, it seems like if somebody is occupying the dwelling that is not the owner, if we have the owner occupancy requirements, the idea would be that the owner is vacated while somebody else is staying there. Why would additional parking be?
Well, that's not always the case. So often the owners do maintain residency while they're renting it out. So I think it would be in those circumstances. You know, some of the codes that we looked at have an allowance for on-street parking. And I think in most places in the city that works. Obviously in the university neighborhood, parking is restricted. So currently single-family dwellings are just required to have one parking space per dwelling. So I think we'd be looking for an additional parking space. Most people have that in a driveway. And staff is going to propose to council that in places that aren't parking restricted, that we could also look at on-street parking.
Got it. Thank you.
Some SROs could be considered short-term rentals. You know, the old boarding house model that Joe talked about. If you're only there for like a week,
Got it,
then
yeah,
you might
that
consider,
makes
and so if the owner is parking in the driveway and you're only there for a week in the SRO, where do you park? So there's times when it could become a bit of a challenge.
I have a quick question on the transient occupancy taxes. Did I get it right?
Yeah, we call it transient room tax, but that's
Room
what
tax.
we
Okay.
call it.
Is that the same as the hotels collect? So it's all one big pot of money?
I actually don't know that because the finance folks collect that, so I'm happy to find that out and then I can get that
Because
information.
that is currently being collected though.
It is
Is there-
collected by hotels and motels, yes. And it mostly goes to promote travel, although the state committed a portion of it temporarily for the 2021 track
World Games.
Yeah, the state collects it, as you all know, and then we'll collect it. And the amount we collect goes to our cultural resources program, which is in that vein.
What I'm getting at is there a way that we can use the amount of tax created from Airbnb or VRBO to get an estimate of how much in our community, how much activity? Because it seems like there's not any policing of the sites, but that might be a way that we can get some additional info.
It might, the prices vary in terms of what people are charging, so I don't know that we get an accurate count. The finance department, and I showed this to the city council, did give us a map which had some sort of points on the map. If you look up, I think it's booking.com, it says that we have 800 and some odd available short-term rentals. So we have some vague ideas like that, but I think it's really underestimating.
Okay, interesting. Go ahead, Jenna.
So how, just again, a nitpicky question, like go through the scenario of somebody who owns a duplex and the owner occupancy requirement, if they live in one half and they're renting out the other, like would that, the 270 days a year or the 90 days a year, like how would that affect?
In terms of renting the other half of the duplex out? Well, it comes to the number of days. I mean, obviously that would be a structure has to be owner occupied on one side, and they could rent out the other duplex for stays that are 30 days or less. That's how the short-term rentals are regulated, so anything.
But they wouldn't be limited to 90 days a year on the other half?
That's a good question, actually.
Yeah, just how do multi-units work in general?
Yeah.
Or if somebody rents a room in their house, right?
Well, renting a room in a house, I mean, we probably will look at them as separate structures because they are two dwellings and two addresses, so each one could be rented. And they are separately owned. I mean, sometimes someone might own both of them, right? But they often are also owned by separate owners. So if they were renting a room in their house, that would fall under the no limitations on the number of days because you'd actually be occupying it. But yeah, we'd look at them as two dwellings.
Got a question in the back and then Chris.
To piggyback off of what Jenna asked, is it similar if somebody has a single family house and then an ADU in the back and they either rent either or some people actually have like a trailer in their driveway where they rent it out, and how would that work?
The ADUs would be a little different because they're not considered a separate dwelling. They're actually considered accessory to the residential dwelling. So with the ADUs, you could rent one or the other. I don't think we look at them separately because that raises density issues.
Okay. And Chris, go.
Yeah, these are all really good questions, and they're an attempt to try to find the details on what it is you're trying to achieve. And at the higher level we've had, they've been sent to collect more information, but at the higher level, really I think what's motivating us is in kind of two areas. One is how does this impact affordable rent? I mean, are there units available at an affordable rent for people to use, or have they somehow been taken out of the inventory? And I think understanding how many units there actually are, I think is a really critical question, and that's some of the things we're trying to figure out to implement would help us to get more of a handle on that. I think the second area is one that deals with abuse. Has the short-term rental market industry begun to abuse what's going on? I will hear complaint from somebody who says, oh, there's an ST short-term rental next to my home, and they're having parties all night long, and there's drunken people falling into the street, or they're renting it all year round, and it's terrible and trash. And I think part of what we're also trying to do is say, how can we ensure that there's not an abuse of the system, regardless of how many of them there are. And so I think we're trying to approach this from both sides. How does it affect the rental market, but also how can we prevent abuse? And as she said, we don't want to stop the practice. We just want to ensure that it's not out of control in either one of those areas. And so the kinds of rulemaking that we've sent them back to do is really an effort to say, how can we prevent abuse of this system, even as we say we don't want to get rid of it, but we also don't want to have abuse of the system. And so we're trying to put in place the regulatory options that other cities have found success with that have reduced the likelihood of abuse. So the questions you're asking, I think, also go into that hopper. Is there a chance for either an inventory impact or an abuse impact?
I guess the question in my mind is just, have we quantified somehow, and it sounds like it's hard to, but have we quantified the actual versus anecdotal impacts of these short-term rentals before we start creating ordinances around them?
Yeah, and that's why we're trying to look at models from other communities. You couldn't be more right. You don't want to just knee-jerk and not know whether you're doing something realistic or not. So they're really trying to find out what's the experience in other communities, what have the regulations that have been put in place really done in terms of actual impact, so that we don't just create a rule just to create a rule and feel good, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem.
I thought an earlier staff memo had a study that somebody did, it wasn't necessarily local, trying to determine whether there is an impact on rental supply, housing supply, and my memory is that it was hard to prove.
That's what we found. We actually had library staff do some research, and then I think Sadie Dintel did a graduate thesis looking at that, and we attached that white paper to the city council's agenda item summary the first time. And it is, that question of, does it affect the housing market? Well, not in Eugene currently, generally, because we're a relatively small percent, the amount that we contract. They're saying it's 1% to 2%, as compared to the coast, for instance, or Central.
Hood River.
It's great, yeah.
Destinations.
Yeah. Great.
But the impact to the housing market is difficult to quantify at this stage.
You might be interested in that.
Any other questions or? Okay.
Well,
got Josh?
Maybe John can correct. This is just really obnoxious and nitpicky, but I was just recently reading state statute. Isn't vacation rental 45 days or less? Not 30?
There isn't a definition that we're aware of.
ORS 90 has something about vacation rentals.
That has to do with the coverage of the Landlord-Tenant Act.
Okay. Yeah.
Only. It doesn't have to do with the transient tax.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, go ahead.
I would just like to share as a thermometer point that Wayne County, before the start-up dates of November 1st for shelter, like Egan warming centers and things of that nature. You remember last week we had that really cold thing? So the county in no time opened up Wheeler Pavilion on the 29th and 30th. And just to give you a feel, 140 people slept in Wheeler Pavilion on November 29th, and 200 and some people slept there on the 30th.
Way beyond expected.
Way beyond expected. And then
so that would be October.
October, you mean, right?
October, yeah.
Thank God for John. Yes, sir.
I'm glad I want to make sure
it's
you
the
didn't
pain
last
meds. And just a general policy question, and that is, do we know of other host cities for World Games? I was told that typically they will use those to build a large number of athlete housing that then is converted to subsidized housing for the community and do we know if that is in the works? And
not that I'm aware of.
Is there, I don't know how much authority we have, but can we have some staff person research that? Like, what have other cities done to create athlete housing, and then how has that been converted to public housing?
Well, I do know that we're the smallest city by far.
Yeah, I think it varies by city.
To host it.
Major cities have
irrelevant.
No, I know, but I'm saying major cities can absorb the
Right.
It may be
Isn't
that
it-
they're thinking the universities.
I just don't know.
During the summer, so I assume a lot of them are staying in the dorms.
Yeah, I've never seen any money being allocated to do that, so that's why I would think it's probably not happening.
Probably not. I was just, any excuse, right?
That's a good idea.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Right
Any,
on the
if there's nothing, hey, it's 1:30, let's call it adjourned.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.